my supplication. I call upon the name of the Lord. I take the cup of salvation. The pain of hell laid on me. The snares of death that compassed me. Thou hast delivered me from death. My eyes felt tears, my feet from falling. In the sight of his people, I made my vows to the Lord. In your midst, Jerusalem, in his house, in his courts, the pain of hell laid hold on me. The snares of death encompassed me. Thou hast delivered me from death. My eyes from tears, my feet from Let my prayer come before the Lord of my salvation. Oh, my soul is troubled, Lord, give ear unto my cry. Every day I call upon the Lord of my salvation. If my faith is now gone,
What?
and I don't know why, oh Lord.
I tried it. I was from dynamic. Yeah,
I stretch my hand out to leave. My face is out of my sight. Thy wrath has swept over me.
And that's all you can do?
I cry aloud in the night. I stretch my hand out to thee. Thy face is out of my sight. Thy wrath has swept over me. Let my prayer come before the Lord of my salvation. Oh, my soul is troubled, Lord, give ear unto my cry. I'm cast off and I don't know why. Give ear unto my cry, oh Lord,
Try to see if it says it's
my salvation.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
I've been kicked around all week and downhearted. Bring on the music, the Bible, let's get started. Right here is a
Dynamic Christian Ministries presents Start Our Sabbath, SOS, the live Friday night program to help you and your family start your Sabbath off right. You've had a tough week, and now it's time to relax and spend time with God's people from all around the world. That's why Wes and Nancy White invite you into their studios to relax and enjoy life. As always, we'll have lively Bible topics, and we'll examine current events. Your input is welcome. We want you to talk to us in our chat room. We want to hear your comments and your questions. So get your dinner and your Bible ready for tonight's show. I'm Mr. Announcer, Gary Gibbons. We're broadcasting live from Big Sandy, Texas. And here are your hosts for Start Our Sabbath, Wes and Nancy White.
Good evening and welcome to our 88th show of Start Our Sabbath. Maybe we should call this the piano show.
What do you mean the piano show?
A piano has 88 keys and this is our 88th show. What do you think?
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We hope you've had a great week.
And even more importantly, we hope you're going to have a wonderful Sabbath.
For some of you, the Sabbath is already upon you.
For others, the Sabbath won't be with you for a little while yet.
And for others who are watching this as a replay, the Sabbath could already be behind you.
And for those of you in a time machine...
No, please don't go there.
Okay. Whatever the case, your being with us on this show is a blessing for us, and we're grateful to you for joining us, so thank you so much.
Now I'm getting all excited thinking about what's his birthday coming up in July. We're going to celebrate. I'm taking him out to dinner and a movie. We are going to paint the town red.
Paint the town red. Isn't that great? I'm married to a communist. All right. So.
Don't be a grump, sweetie. Just think of your upcoming birthday like this. Birthdays are just nature's way of telling us it's okay to eat more cake.
Ooh, I can live with that. Yes, okay.
Wes is not really into birthdays, and he shows it by not wanting to go to birthday parties for other people
True,
either.
I do not like to go to other people's birthday parties.
So tell our viewers what you say when you go to birthday parties.
Really? You want me to go there? You really
Yes,
want to
please.
go? Okay. All right. We walk into the house of the person whose birthday it is, and I tell the birthday person, I say this: forget about the past because you can't change it. Forget about the future because you can't predict it. And forget about the present because I didn't get you one.
Well, I'm different. I like to help people celebrate their birthdays, and I believe that a true friend remembers your birthday, but not your age.
Yes, right. You know, I remember when I used to attend the church in the Chicago area years and years ago, we had this really old guy. We called him Old Man Wheeler.
Wouldn't it have been more respectful to call him Mr. Wheeler or Brother Wheeler?
Whatever. But I mean, he was old. And one day after church, they gave him a birthday cake because he was like 92 or 93 years old. It was his birthday or something. And the pastor decides he's going to give a toast. And he addresses Old Man Wheeler and he says, Mr. Wheeler, what do you think is the reason for your long life?
Well, it's a great question. What was the answer?
Well, Old Man Wheeler, he scratched his old bald head for a minute and he said, well, let me think. What's the reason for my long life? I suppose it's because I was born such a long, long time ago. All right, enough about birthdays. Let's talk about some good people who are a lot younger than Old Man Wheeler, okay?
You mean people who are also younger than you?
All right, that too. Two of my favorite people who I wouldn't mind shouting out birthday wishes to if they ever have a birthday.
So big shout out goes to Carl and Mimi for all their hard work on SOS.
Yes, thank you, Carl and Mimi, for the terrific job that you do.
We absolutely couldn't do the show without you.
Yeah, they do a marvelous job for SOS as we broadcast out of our $1 million studio here in Big Sandy, Texas.
We do not have $1 million studio.
You're taking away all my fun. I want to brag about having $1 million studio.
We don't need $1 million studio to teach the Word of God and encourage people on the Sabbath day.
Okay, you win. But maybe Carl and Mimi, who we thank you, maybe Carl is in $1 million studio in North Carolina. Is that possible?
No, he's not. And Mimi's not sitting in $1 million studio in British Columbia.
All right, well, it's a thought. All
We
right.
also want to do a shout out to Terry Lucenhide for her expertise in bringing Bill onto the show every Friday night.
Yeah, now if you want to talk about a guy who's old, let's talk about Bill.
Bill is not that old.
He sure is. Look at this birthday cake that he had for his last birthday party.
Oh, man.
All those
Can we
candles.
please get back to Terry Terry, who is so talented, and how much we appreciate her bringing Bill on the show every Friday night.
Yeah, Nancy is right. We really appreciate Terry, who I'll bet is sitting in $1 million studio out there in Southern California.
No, Terry and Bill are just broadcasting out of their home, just like we used to do.
And now we're broadcasting out of our $150 a month rented studio on the main drag of Big Sandy, Texas. Yeehaw!
Yeah, thank you so much, Terry, for your sharing your many skills to get the show out over the internet every Friday evening.
Yes, and thank you, Terry, for helping poor Bill, who couldn't do any of this without you.
That is so true.
Well, just like I could never put on this show without Nancy.
No, that's so sweet, baby.
Okay.
We've got a great show for you tonight. Bill is going to talk about being worthy.
Nancy is going to talk about faith versus religion.
Faith versus religion,
Yeah.
Smackdown.
Yeah, who's going to win, faith
We'll
or
see. You got to
religion?
tune
Wow.
in.
Okay.
And Wes is going to talk about the image of Daniel 2. Who
Yeah.
says we don't get into prophecy?
That's right. This is going to be one fun show, so please stay with us.
And before we go any further, let's open with prayer.
Okay. Father in heaven, we thank you so much for this evening, this beginning of the Sabbath that's here with us. We ask your blessing on all the others who are being obedient to your Sabbath day, the fourth commandment. We ask for your blessing on them. Father, we ask for a special blessing on our audience and for our co-workers who are in North Carolina, in British Columbia, and in Southern California. These people do a marvelous job, and we ask that you guide and direct everything that they do tonight, not only with the words of the presentation, but also with the technical stuff. So, Father, we're so grateful to you that we can get together electronically with your people around the world. We are so grateful for every one of them who watches the show. Each one of them provides a blessing for the show, and we thank you for them. So we commit SOS into your hands, give you praise and thanks in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Okay.
All right, let's now take a quick commercial break.
We'll be right back.
Jeremiah 9:23 says that man is to glory in his knowledge of the great God of the universe. But knowing God is such a time-consuming process. It takes your entire life to do this, and we are indeed expected to make the effort. You can better understand God by celebrating and understanding his annual high days, as mentioned in Leviticus 23. The closer you look at these days, the more sense you can make of who God is. Conversely, if you ignore these annual festival days, you are creating obstacles for yourself as you attempt to better understand who God is. At the Ronald L. Dart Evangelistic Association, we have an informative message on this subject. In this sermon, Ron Dart talks about why you should take a real close look at God's annual high days. The title of this message is A Day of Salvation. You can find it on the audio recordings tab on our website, rldea.com. This message is free. Again, the title is A Day of Salvation at rldea.com.
Thank you, Mr. Announcer, Mr. Gary Gibbons. Before we get into our first segment tonight, I want to ask a real quick question. How's the sound tonight? We were asked to turn the volume down on the show a little bit, and we did a little acoustic management here behind the camera to hopefully deaden all the treble and tinniness on the show. So talk to us in the chat room. Let us know how the sound is tonight.
Okay.
Now that we've got that out of the way, what have you got for us this evening in our first segment, sweetheart?
Well, in the book titled The Storyteller by Jodi Picoult, the character called Joseph says, "No child truly chooses his religion. It's just the luck of the draw which blanket of beliefs you are wrapped in. When you are too young to think for yourself, you are baptized and taken to church." Of course, we don't do child baptisms, but it's a great point. So let's talk about religion, specifically the difference between religion and faith. This topic is important to me because I am more aware than ever of the difference between faith and religion and the damage that religion has done to every generation throughout time. I believe that Jesus Christ, Messiah, Lord, and Savior, was rejected by the religious leaders of his day and their followers at that time, in part because he offered a better understanding of real faith, a faith that is built on relationship with a loving God, and a faith that requires a loving relationship with our fellow man. I believe that these religious leaders of Jesus' time, the priests, the scribes, the Pharisees, and the Sadducees, and the teachers, were fearful of letting go of the very important religion that they had built. Theirs was a system of do's and don'ts that helped them feel in control of their lives and gave them various degrees of control over others. Theirs was a religion that gave them power and position in their own little worlds. And I think that they were surprised that Jesus didn't spend his time with them, praising them for the religion that they had built around the books of the law that God gave them. Instead, Jesus took time to ask for the burdens, Instead, Jesus took them to task for the burdens they placed on people. And he spent a great deal of time eating with and talking to known sinners and the little people and the castaways of that society instead of the religious leaders. God and Jesus did not intend for faith to be a heavy burden. Matthew 11:28. Come to me, all you who are labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Human leadership typically doesn't make our yoke easy, does it? Or doesn't make our burdens light. Instead, those with power tend to be like what we find in Luke 11:46, where it says, Jesus replied, and you experts at the law, woe to you, because you load people down with burdens that they can hardly carry, and you yourselves will not lift one finger to help them. I don't believe this description that Jesus relates is a thing of the past either. Here's what I find in the primordial soup of 3-letter spin-offs of the Worldwide Church of God, as well as most mainstream religions today. I find that at their spiritual, cellular level, many of these groups cling to the religion and the religious system they built. They cling to the traditions, rules, and power that they have added to the law. And rather than teaching the true faith once delivered, which again is about relationships, they cling to the old teachings that don't make your yoke easy or your burdens light. Sure, some of these burden-inflicting leaders do it with less passion or more passion than they did in the old days, or they do it with less punishment or more punishment than the old days, but again, most all of them do it. For example, when I see a fight over music, it's not a fight over faith. It's a fight over religion. We all agree that the Bible tells us to praise God in song, don't we? But the Bible never says what songs or what type of songs, whether there can be drums or guitar to accompany it, how often one can repeat the chorus. The Bible doesn't tell us if our music must be accompanied by a piano or organ. Scripture doesn't dictate how many songs to sing at a church service. Yet so many church leaders cling to past traditions as though they were the actual law of God. That's music. But what about the New Testament church service in general? People grouse and bicker over the format of church service almost as much as they do music. Yet the Bible is almost entirely silent on what a New Testament church service should look like. We know the apostles preached, and we can assume the church service included singing because we have a record that at the New Testament Passover or Lord's Supper service, they sang a song. And we know that the day of worship is the Sabbath, and that we're to forego work on that day, and that we're to assemble on that day. But that is it. Now, if you disagree with what I've just said, please send me a scripture from the New Testament that gives specific direction on this matter of church service format, and I will gladly repeat it in the comments later tonight. When we make our decisions to limit how to worship God, or what songs we can sing, or what instruments we can utilize, or what the format of church must be, when we do that, we are making God small. We're making him petty by attempting to plug him into our stringently designed church services. Also in the past, we made God petty when we set up rules about when, where, and how long to pray and study the Bible, as though we can put a minimum on the number of minutes we can prescribe to someone regarding prayer and Bible study. And that's also short-sighted. We must be more long distance in our view of how we see things. We must do everything we can to see through God's eyes and not through our own myopic carnal eyes. Our church services, our daily walk with God, and our faith in general should be making us feel like the psalmist said in Psalm 17:13, "Thy way, O God, is in the sanctuary. Who is so great as a God as our God?" Or as the NIV puts it, "Your ways, God, are holy. What God is as great as our God?" Although the word translated sanctuary in the King James can be and often is translated holy, it also means set apart. God's ways are holy, set apart, different than the ways of the world. We should never try to think that God's ways are the ways of the world, where there are power struggles and the imposition of man-made traditions and rules. If that's what we think about, we're thinking about religion and not faith. Our God is greater than any small g God that humans can ever come up with or ever have come up with over the past 6,000 years. Our God is not confined by mankind's view of him or rules for how to worship. 2 members of my family recommended that I read a book titled Conversations with God, and so I finally did. Actually, I listened to it on Audible. I found it interesting, not so much for what the book said, but for how the book made both of these relatives feel. I found it interesting that of these 2 family members who recommended this book, one says, "I am more spiritual than religious," that is, believes in a higher power and believes in prayer, but doesn't attend any church. The other family member who recommended this book is a self-proclaimed atheist. In my opinion, angry at the religion he was taught and forced to obey as a child, doubtful of God, and the God that he was told demanded that kind of rules and regulations and traditions. So I'll refer to the first as the spiritual one and to the second as the atheist. Now remember, the spiritual one says she's not religious and the atheist denies the existence of God. Yet this book made each one of them more comfortable with at least the idea of God. And each one told me he or she felt it provided a better explanation in their minds of what God is like, what he expects, and what a relationship with him could or should be. Isn't that amazing? Some of the book aligns with traditional Christian religions, and in fact the author is a lapsed Catholic. Some of it aligns with New Age beliefs, which I'm assuming he researched or knew something about before he came up with this book. I found it interesting that the book broke from traditional religions by saying that there is no hell. The spiritual one said to me, "This book lowers the bar for entry to be with God." What? Brethren, if our religion has taught people that there is a bar, then we have failed. The atheists said something to the effect that this book made God seem like someone reachable, more approachable. Again, this atheist believed for years and years that there were some minimum that he needed to attain in order to have access to God. Makes me sad to think that the world has the impression that the bar is set high for entry into a relationship with our Father and Creator, or for calling oneself a Christian, or for being a believer. I'm sad to think that my relatives once believed that there was a bar and that that bar is set high, or that God is far from reach, or even flat out unapproachable. There was a time when the religious leaders of Jesus' time set a high bar on a relationship with God. It was an artificial bar, though. It was a bar that was created by men and not by God. And it's important for everyone to understand that Jesus Christ's sacrifice took that bar and placed it on the ground. Remember that on the day of Jesus' crucifixion, the veil of the temple was ripped. This opening of the veil symbolized our ability to walk right up to the throne room of the Almighty and chat directly with our Maker. In this book that my relatives asked me to read, God comes to the writer and just talks with them about everything, answers his questions openly and honestly, makes jokes, and patiently spends as much time as the author needs. As Christians, we should already know that God is exactly like that. We shouldn't have to read a book to learn this. The Bible already tells us this. The problem is that we let men convince us of things that can and will interfere with our direct relationship with God. Faith, a relationship with the Father, is always open and available. There's no bar to entry at all. And we should feel great, at peace, and happy after spending time with God, whether we're at home or at church services. God is approachable. If your faith doesn't provide rest for your world-weary soul, then you're not looking at faith. You're looking at religion. When Jesus said, "For my yoke is easy and my burden is light," I believe this message was a huge draw, bringing followers from the masses to Jesus during his time on the earth. Whether they were Jews bound by the burden of the religion the leaders had built, or Gentiles whose gods were many and often mean and demanding. The sad thing to me is that my two relatives, the spiritual one and the atheist, both grew up in church, attending regularly with parents who did their best to both teach and live a life of love. The parents of these relatives were involved in church activities, which were many in their areas of the country, and had church friends with whom they were close. In short, they had all the things we parents try to tell ourselves will ensure that our children will stay in the faith. And yet these two relatives didn't stay in church or even in relationship with God. Now don't get me wrong, God has rules, but there are just a few, just 10. And Jesus was able to boil those down to 2. Let's first read that in Mark 12, starting in verse 28. One of the teachers of the law came and heard them debating. Noticing that Jesus had given them a good answer, he asked them, "Of all the commandments, which is the most important?" "The most important one," answered Jesus, "is this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this. Love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these." And similarly, we find in Luke 10, starting in verse 25, on one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" And he answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this and you will live." My question is this. If it all boils down to love God and love your fellow man as explained in just 10 commandments, how could anything else come into play in my religion? The simple answer is that religion is not the same thing as faith. I boil it down to this. Faith is relationship. Religion is rules. 2 more quick points about the book. It said everything boils down to love or fear, that all evil in the world comes from fear. And I think that makes a lot of sense, that fear motivates evil. Whether it's fear of having something taken away or losing power or of the future. And the second point, the spiritual one told me the book Conversations with God, in her interpretation, offered this, that you can live in the world, live a life of fear-inspired evil, and also spend time with God. But the more you spend time with God, the less you will want to live that life of fear-inspired evil. I wish I could say on the show tonight, young people, the only barrier to your faith is your willingness to build a relationship with God. But I know our stats on the show. Start Our Sabbath. There are not a lot of young people watching SOS. So I don't have a lot of young people to plead to on this point. Instead, I will plead to my fellow old folks. Please be sure that you never put up any barriers of your own. Let young people have their music. Let them lead songs. Let them preach. Lead Bible studies. Ask questions. Change things up. Don't be like the religious leaders of Jesus' day who would cling to their rituals, their power, their authority, and their control. Maybe you're not in a position to attend church, let alone lay down any power or control at the feet of younger folks who want to serve and worship God as God has inspired them to do. If that's the case, then please join me in praying about it, praying that young people will not get discouraged and that leadership will not suppress them, that will be open to allowing them to have no barriers. And please speak to everyone around you, young, old, rich or poor, work, friends in the neighborhood, about God and Jesus. Not about the rules of religion, but about the joy of relationship. Tell them how approachable God is and how much He wants to talk to them. Tell them how Jesus ensured that there are no barriers to starting a relationship with God. And one more thing, young people, if you're out there and listening, just start by talking to God. Talk to him as you would a friend. Ask questions, complain, laugh, cry. Then read the Bible for yourself in any translation you like. Spend time with God, all of you out there, young or old. Lots of time, on your own terms, and see what a relationship, a natural, open relationship, does for you. I welcome your thoughts, comments, and questions, and you can write me right now in the chat room or anytime at nancy@dynamicchristianministries.org.
When God blessed you with the knowledge of Jesus' personal salvation for you, he also burdened you with the knowledge of some really bad things that are going to be inflicted on the world between now and the time of Jesus' return. On the day that you accepted Jesus and received the Holy Spirit, chances are that only then did you start to really understand the horrible things that are prophesied in the book of Revelation. You soon learned that the events that will take place in the last days of this age are the stuff of which nightmares are made. At the Ronald L. Dart Evangelistic Association, we have a message that's helpful to people who know that world events are destined to be traumatic, because difficult days ahead are not something that only the church is cognizant of. Godless secularists are also aware that difficult times are coming. For that reason, it's not uncommon for Christians and secularists to ask, how will mankind survive these future times of cataclysm? What person or group can solve the problems once they are upon us? In other words, who will save us? Well, this is the title of a message given by the late Ron Dart. Who then will save us? You can find this message on the audio recordings tab of our website, rldea.com. This message is free. Again, the title is, Who Will Save Us? At rldea.com.
We're about to bring our good friend Bill on for his segment, and you don't want to miss it because Bill always has great stuff, doesn't he?
Absolutely.
And remember, Bill runs one of my favorite, if not my number one favorite, Facebook pages called Seventh-day Sabbath Keepers. And at this point, Seventh-day Sabbath Keepers, as you know, has over 28,000 followers. That's something
incredible.
That is incredible. 28,000 followers, and it grows at like I think 300 a week.
That is amazing.
Congratulations, Bill. You're doing
probably
a great
that
job.
$1 million studio.
He's in $1 million studio. That's why. And again, as I point out, it's really hard to find an organization out there, let alone a Sabbath-keeping organization, that has 28,000 followers. And I know that a lot of the church organizations, they look at Bill and they say, how does he do this? Mm-hmm. How does he get this done? Well, Bill's doing an amazing job. And for that reason, we're so proud to have Bill on the show, and also because of the wonderful messages that he provides. So let's see if I can bring my brother Bill on the show. Pray that God will help me to press the buttons right so that I can get this done.
Bring him on.
Bring him on. Let's do this.
It's always a scary time for you as you... There. Oh, there he is.
Well, good evening to all of our viewers here on Start Our Sabbath.
Good evening, Bill. I take it you're going to talk more about the Lord's Supper and Passover tonight.
Well, that's correct. It's important that we give God's people meat in due season.
Good. Then give us what we need.
Well, the one thing that we all need as God's people is the return of Jesus.
Yeah, good. Other than the kingdom, tell us what else we need tonight.
All right, I'm going to give us a little bit more than that.
Okay.
Okay, in the present. You know, as we approach the Lord's Supper, I wish to discuss the concept of being worthy. Some may think that they have sinned so grievously that they are not worthy of the blood and the body of Christ. You know, back in a previous Start Our Sabbath, I talked about being called by God as the only member of my family at the age of 14. And then later on being baptized and give my life to Christ at age 17. But at that time, I didn't completely understand what the words justification and sanctification meant at that time. I just knew I'd been forgiven of my sins and that God had given me His Holy Spirit. But what about the sins that I continue to do? Almost immediately. Virtually every day in some manner or another, in every day since. I was trying to be good, but I knew I still sin sometimes. And I was very disappointed in myself. what did that mean? Was I even converted? Would I even be in the kingdom of God? And I explored many thoughts on this topic, and I read different conflicting ideas. And I thought I'd never know that if I was saved until Jesus Christ came. I didn't realize it at the time, but in many ways, the church that I was in at that time had a very limited concept of what grace was all about. And it had some issues with perfectionism and legalism. Now, lest you get me wrong, I believe in the perfect law of God, and I certainly believe in living in submission to God's will in everything in our life. Yet early on, I knew that if I was to rely on my own righteousness to achieve salvation, I wasn't going to make it. I was going to fall short if I had to rely on myself. And then it struck me, and it came with an answer to me from the Word of God. And listen up to this, it's important. 1 John 5, verse 13. I write these things to you who believe in the name of the Son of God, so that you may know that you have eternal life. I hope you didn't miss that, because it's an important point. So I'm going to say it again. 1 John 5, verse 13. I write these things to you who believe in the name of the Son of God, so that you may know that you have eternal life. So listen, you can know whether or not you have it or not. It doesn't have to be doubtful, a disputation. And it hit me. I know I can be saved because salvation doesn't depend on my righteousness, only on relying on Jesus Christ's righteousness. And that's it. It was so clear and simple. And yet, I'm afraid many do not understand this simple yet amazing truth. I realized that spending time in God's Word opened my heart to receive awareness from the Holy Spirit. I had tried to live up to God's expectations, but the harder I tried, well, frankly, the more I failed. How could a good God demand perfection from such a fallible creature as me? All right, it wasn't fair. But then the revelation came from another scripture, Ephesians 2, verse 8. It says, by grace you have been saved through faith. That is not from your own selves, but as a gift from God. You know, the law is holy and good, but the law demands perfection, and it reveals our sin, as it says in Romans 7. It cannot save you. It can only condemn. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with understanding what it is that condemns us. So I'm not against that. But we're guilty. We are sinners. But even though I had sincerely given my commitment to Jesus at age 17, I was trying to live under that law. And I still thought I needed to be good enough to be saved. And consequently, I had no security in my salvation. And it took away from my worship and my relationship with God. Maybe a touch fearful of being honest with God and having some distance from God because of my own sins that have separated me. But with a new awakening, I was able to embrace grace. And I transcended the rules to a relationship. And for the first time, I saw Jesus as my friend. His law no longer condemned me. That law lived in my heart, though. And so did Christ. Yes, strive to live a life of righteousness and obedience to God's law and His ways. But always realize that when we fail, the blood of Christ has already covered for it. Way back, the Lamb was slain for our sins before the foundation of the earth. Our sins are removed from God as far as the east is from the west. And that's a long way. You know, as you take the communion at the Lord's Supper this year, claim that covering and that acceptance and that knowing of Jesus Christ as a surety and a fact. And realize that with our repentance, we have the surety of knowing that you are loved by God and that you have a relationship with Him. And in fact, you have eternal life as our blessing when we will meet Jesus Christ in the air at His coming. Count on it.
Okay, we froze up. Okay.
Here he is. Oh,
Okay.
okay.
Is it safe to assume there is no God, or even to assume He exists, but He's just not around anymore? You might think that God started Project Earth, but then moved on to more interesting things. And that might be a fair assumption, considering the mess that humanity has made of our planet. We even see in the Bible There was a time or two when God got pretty miffed at what people had gotten into, and he considered ending the whole thing. At the Ronald L. Dart Evangelistic Association, we have a printable Bible study entitled Eyes to See. It was written by the late Ronald L. Dart, and he talked about things you can examine to determine whether or not God really exists. You can find the study and many more on the website of the Ronald L. Dart Evangelistic Association. Our website is rldea.com. Our website has many informative and interesting messages by Ron Dart, who was one of the most effective evangelists of the 20th century. Again, the title is Eyes to See at rldea.com. Is it safe to
I'd like to begin our final segment tonight by giving my compliments to the publication known as the Sabbath Sentinel. You can see it here on the screen. This magazine is published by the Bible Sabbath Association. Its president is Kelly McDonald. Some of you watched him earlier on Box. And we've had Kelly on this show at least twice that I can remember. So we're fans of Kelly and the BSA on SOS. And let's be clear, I want to make sure this is really clear. I have the utmost respect for the Sabbath Sentinel, the Bible Sabbath Association, Kelly McDonald, and all the folks who work on this ministry. They're one of the few ministries that's got a lady who's in a high position. It's June Narber. And a lot of church organizations won't let women do things like this, but the Bible Sabbath Association does, and they're to be commended for it. Now, do my compliments about the Bible Sabbath Association and the Sabbath Sentinel mean that I endorse everything that they publish? Of course not. That would be silly. Conversely, when I disagree with them on something that's published in the Bible Sabbath Association or the Sabbath Sentinel, does that mean that I'm disparaging them or bad-mouthing them or dragging their name through the mud, as one big sandy preacher is always whining about when people don't agree with him on a point of doctrine or administration? Of course not. Disagreement is not hate. Disagreement should never alienate. Instead, disagreement should engender dialogue between Christians who have love for one another. Further, and I'm guessing on this, just a guess on my part, that it's just possible that some of the folks at the Bible Sabbath Association might also disagree with each other regarding articles that get published in the Sabbath Sentinel. I think I can safely say this because the people who run the BSA are not monolithic in their theology. They're from all kinds of different organizations. I got a feeling they don't agree on everything. And this is one of the reasons why the Sabbath Sentinel is such a healthy magazine. There's no little tin pot dictator who runs it telling everybody at the BSA that they can only promote what he teaches. Rather, it's my understanding that these BSA people are collegial in their approach to ministry and the preaching of the gospel. So please don't take anything I say tonight as being a disparagement of the Bible Sabbath Association or the Sabbath Sentinel, because the Sabbath Sentinel is a forum for people to present differing ideas so that discussion will be initiated on various topics. And this is a good thing, a healthy thing. And in a sense, the Sabbath Sentinel is similar to SOS for the following reason. Both the Sabbath Sentinel and SOS are not afraid to show you different sides of an issue. So it's for that reason that I appreciate the Sabbath Sentinel. Now, tonight we're going to talk about prophecy. And as we talk about prophecy, we're going to show some opposing views on prophecy. Are we good so far? Are you happy with that? Okay. I just got the latest issue of the Sabbath Sentinel this week. It's the March-April 2019 issue. And as always, it's got some really good stuff in it, like it always does. Like the opening editorial about not trampling on God's Sabbath. This is a piece that was written by Royce Mitchell. Again, good stuff. But I just got to share with you an article on prophecy that appeared in this issue, because you know that I love prophecy, but you also know that I detest the way that people twist Scripture for the purpose of promoting their own personal predictions of what's supposedly going to happen in our lifetimes, okay? And I wanted to share with you this Sabbath Sentinel article on prophecy because it goes against so much of what many of you have been taught about prophecy. I know I was taught that the beast of Revelation was going to attack the United States and kill 1/3 of all Americans and then enslave another third. Well, this Sabbath Sentinel article takes a totally different approach to this topic, and I think you're going to find it interesting no matter what your church history is regarding prophecy. And I know that right off the bat, some of you out there are going to say, well, Wes is going to talk about an article that goes against what I've been taught about prophecy, and I'm not going to listen to it. And if that's the case, I got to ask you, what have you got to lose? Because my guess is that your present church and your past church have not had a real good track record on their prophecies. So why double down and defend a belief system that has had some major failures? Why not step outside the box for the next 20 or 30 minutes in the time remaining and see if it's just possible that you might hear something that helps you in your efforts to understand the Bible? All right, now let's be clear. These things that we're going to discuss, and I'm looking forward to it, this is a real exciting topic, I'm not necessarily endorsing any of them. I'm not going to try to persuade you to believe them because, frankly, I think that some of the stuff, or a lot of the stuff that we're going to look at tonight, is not really, really good. Some of it's really interesting and good, but some of it, I don't know. I'm only suggesting that we look at this material to see if we can learn some lessons. Can I say that again? I'm suggesting we look at this material tonight to see if we can learn some lessons. Can we give it a shot for the remaining time that we have on the program? Come on, let's try. Now, here's what first piqued my interest in this article. According to this article in the Sabbath Sentinel, America is not going to be a victim of the end-time beast. Instead, according to this article, America is going to be in league with the Roman Catholic Church, and together they're going to persecute Christians. How's that for a twist? Didn't see that one coming, did you? I didn't see it coming. Again, fascinating article, so please stay with us as we go through it. The article is entitled Christian Persecution in America. It was written by a fellow named Aubrey Duncan, A-U-B-R-E-Y, Duncan. And you can find it on the internet. Go ahead and Google it. You can find it. Don't do it tonight. Write it down, do it later. And he starts off the article pretty good. Here's what Duncan says. I'm going to quote him. He says, the Bible has been remarkably accurate in prophesying the ruling powers of the earth. From the time of the Babylonian Empire to our present age, the Bible boasts of 100% accuracy rate in foretelling the nations that would rule supreme over the human family. Still quoting, he says, beginning with Babylon, some 600 years before the birth of Jesus, these powers are undeniably identified, end quote. Okay, I think most of us can go along with that. Again, I love prophecy. So let's do a quick review of a really important aspect of prophecy, and let's look at this image that's in Daniel 2. This is the infamous image that has the it has the head of gold, breast of arms and silver, belly and thighs of brass, legs of iron, and then 10 toes of clay. This is the infamous image that has fascinated and perplexed Bible scholars for over 2,000 years. And remember that most teachers of prophecy say this image is parallel to the 4 beasts that are in Daniel 7. Now, if you're even a little bit familiar with this prophecy in Daniel 2, you know that many religions teach about the symbolism of this image. And here's what's interesting. Just about everyone agrees that the first 4 parts of this image are Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. In other words, when trying to identify the identities of the first 4 parts of the image, it's hard to find disagreement on who is who. It's pretty much universally accepted. Let's look at these first 4 parts of the image. Most prophecy people agree that the head of gold mentioned in Daniel 2 represents the Babylonian Empire. And they say this gold section ties in with the lion of Daniel 7. That's why you see in the picture a picture of a lion over to the right. Hope you can see that. Let me zoom in on that. Let me zoom in on that. See if we can make that a little bit bigger for you. Okay. Second, most prophecy people agree that the breast and arms of silver represent the Persian Empire. And they say that this ties in with the bear of Daniel 7. And that's why you see a bear over on the right-hand side. Third, most people agree that the belly and thighs of brass represent the Greek Empire, and they say this ties in with the leopard of Daniel 7, and that's why we have a leopard on the right. And fourth, most prophecy people agree that the legs of iron represent the Roman Empire, and they say this ties in with the beast of the 10 horns in Daniel 7. Can you see all that in the picture now? Are you still with me? Again, what I've just described is pretty much universally agreed on in prophecy circles. The problem in understanding Daniel 2 starts after these four things that we just discussed. Once we all agree on the first parts of this image, once after that happens, and Katie barred the door, that's when the fight starts. And I say that because Bible scholars cannot agree on what the feet and toes represent. That's the area in contention regarding the image of Daniel 2. In my religious past, I was taught that the fifth part of this image represented the new Roman Empire, the resurrected Roman Empire, under the sway of the Catholic Church. My teachers taught me that while the fourth part of the image, the ancient Roman Empire, was purely pagan, they said that the fifth part of the beast, the feet and the toes, were still pagan, but it was only nominally Christian. Okay? Further, they taught me that this fifth part of the image was some iteration of the European Union that would be allied with the Catholic Church. Further, I was told that this Catholic allied empire would somehow involve Germany attacking the United States, killing a third of all Americans and taking another third into captivity. And then, after that, Russia and China are going to go to war with the European Union, and it's just going to be this big worldwide mess, and it's going to go into the tribulation and all that. I don't want to get into that. Let's stay with Daniel 2. Let's stay focused. My teachers also taught me that eventually everything would be made right because Jesus would return and defeat the Catholic Church and the beast, and Russia and China and everyone. And then after Jesus comes, everybody's going to acknowledge that the people of the United States are descended from Israel's tribe of Joseph. So, in short, in the end times, America is an oppressed nation, a victim that will be rescued by Jesus, rescued from the evil 10-nation European alliance with the Catholic Church. All right, I hope you're with me so far. I hope that's not too complicated. Now, if anyone out there wants to correct me or on my understanding of what I remember in my old Bible classes, please talk to us in the chat room. And if you want to add anything to this, get busy in the chat room. If you have any questions, if you have any disagreements, go ahead and fill up the chat room. Okay. Again, I just gave you one of the many scenarios about the last part of Daniel 2. There are many other scenarios out there. And again, almost all the scenarios agree on the first four parts of the image. Let me pull it up again. They all agree basically on the first four parts of the image. The problem is they can't agree on the last part of the image. So let's get back to our Sabbath Sentinel article written by Aubrey Duncan. And here's how Duncan describes the image in Daniel 2. Right off the bat, surprise, surprise, he says the first part of the image are Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, and Rome. Then what about the fifth part of the image? Hang on to your hats. The fifth part of this Daniel 2 image, according to Duncan in the Sabbath Sentinel, he said it represents the Roman papacy allied with the United States of America. Now, wait a minute. Not only is Duncan saying that in the end times, just for the return of Jesus, America is not going to be an oppressed nation. He says the U.S. is going to be the major oppressor nation of the earth. Some of you find that totally appalling. It's making your head spin. Let's quote some more from Duncan. He says, quote, many clergy, scholars, and laymen are denying America's role in Bible prophecy, yet while many are wondering about, yea, speculating, even denying America's role in Bible prophecy, this nation is rapidly marching toward its prophetic destiny. Still quoting, he says, speculation abounds as to who will be the next world superpower. Will it be China? Will Russia be next? Will Islam hold universal sway? How long will it be for the next superpower to reign? And will it be the ultimate and final world kingdom? He says, however, no need to be misled. The God of creation gives the correct answers, end quote. Now here's where it gets interesting. Because Duncan is now going to talk about a guy he disagrees with before he starts pushing his own theories. Before Duncan tells us what Duncan, insists is going to happen, he first wants to take exception to what another theologian says. He's going to talk about a guy named Laurie, L-A-U-R-I-E. L-A-U-R-I-E. Can you keep all this straight? All that I just presented was written by Duncan, the author of the Sabbath Sentinel article. Duncan then writes about a guy named Laurie. Don't mix them up. And here's what Duncan says about Laurie. I'm quoting Duncan. He says, not too long ago, Greg Laurie, and you can find him on the internet, you can find his blog, I found it. He's a popular evangelical pastor at Harvest Christian Fellowship located at Riverside, California. He wrote on his blog, when I look at Bible prophecy, one thing that is of great interest to me and of great concern is the absence of the United States. He says, he's still quoting, we're not quoting Duncan, we're quoting Laurie now. He says, where is the United States? Why are we in the United States not in the last day scenario? Why is it that we can read of nations like Iraq and Iran and Libya, and that we could possibly find China and Russia mentioned, but we cannot find the United States? He says, I would like to offer 3 plausible answers. Now, these are great questions. This question of finding America in Bible prophecy was something that interested me greatly back in the late 1960s and early 70s when I started studying the Bible as a young man. Like both Duncan and Laurie, I said, why is it that we find these little pipsqueak nations in the Bible, but we don't find the United States? And guess what? My question was vanity. All right, we're going to talk about that more later. And I know that a lot of you out there say that you have already found the U.S. in Bible prophecy. You say that the U.S. is Manasseh, or you say that the U.S. is Ephraim. And those of you who disagree between Ephraim and Manasseh, at least you agree that the United States is Joseph, you know, the father of Ephraim and Manasseh. Well, these two guys that we're talking about, both Duncan and Laurie, they don't agree with you that the U.S. is today composed of descendants of Joseph. And I know that bothers you, but hear me out. It's not going to shake your faith. These two guys are coming from a totally different point of view than you are. So when they ask where we find the United States in the Bible, they come up with a totally different answer than you do. And my question for you now is, are you mature enough to hear them out? Or are you too insecure in your own beliefs to be able to tolerate what others teach? And again, I'm not going to try to promote the teachings of these two guys. Instead of promoting what they teach, or instead of promoting what anyone teaches, I want to see if we can learn a lesson from this discussion, because I believe that the lesson to be learned is the most important part of our search for answers regarding where we find the United States in the end time prophecies. And we're going to get to that. Let's get back to Duncan. In talking about Laurie, he says that Laurie offered 3 plausible answers based, he says, purely on speculation, having no basis in Bible fact. Well, actually, Duncan's statement is incorrect that Laurie's speculation has no basis in Bible fact. Laurie's statements are just as Bible-based as Duncan's are, and I suspected this when I first read the article. So when I read this thing against Laurie written by Duncan, I wanted to check out Laurie's explanations and what the U.S. will be doing in the end times. So I researched it, and here's what I found Laurie says. Again, Laurie says there are 3 possible explanations why the United States is not mentioned in Scripture. One reason, he says, is the United States is not mentioned in Scripture is perhaps because the nation might be devastated by nuclear war. A second possible reason, he says, this is Laurie talking, could be that the United States might decline as a world power. Laurie says, quoting Proverbs 14:34, which reads, "Godliness makes a nation great, but sin is a disgrace to any people." And a third possibility, according to Laurie, could be that the United States will witness a revival. He then talks about the rapture and says that maybe the rapture will take place before this and everyone will wake up and cause mass conversions in the United States. All right, I got to tip my hand a little bit. I got to tell you, I think there's a real good possibility that his second assertion might, maybe, possibly, have I qualified it enough, have some validity, maybe. And again, none of us know this stuff. All we can do is speculate at this point, and this is making you mad, I know. And I'll tell you right out front, I believe there's a possibility that maybe by the time Jesus returns, the United States might no longer be a major power at that point. And not necessarily because of sin, but because of the time element. And I think some of you know where I'm going with this. We're going to get to that. But first, let's continue to deal with Duncan. And let's again look at the part of the image which just about everyone agrees with. You know, the first 4 parts of the image. What's interesting is that their disagreement actually begins at the very end of the 4th empire. This is where their disagreement begins. 4th empire. Look at it on the screen. What's the 4th empire? The Holy Roman Empire. And there's actually, at the very end of that 4th nation, 4th empire, that's where it begins. In his article, Duncan takes us to the book of Revelation. And I'm quoting Duncan. He says, the Apostle John introduces the United States of America, and he does it in Revelation 13:11 through 12. Write that down. Revelation 13:11 through 12. This is, according to Duncan, the Apostle John introducing the United States. And here's what John says in Revelation 13:11 and 12. He says, and I beheld another beast coming out of the earth, and it had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke as a dragon, and he exercised all the power of the first beast before him, and caused the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. End quote. Duncan says, now get this because this is fascinating. He said, Duncan talks about the end of the 4th empire. He says something that doesn't get talked about a lot by prophetic teachers. And why not? Because not everyone agrees on when the Roman Empire ended, the 4th empire. They don't all agree. Did that get your attention? Not everyone agrees with when the Roman Empire ended. Because Bible prophecy guys have different dates on when the 4th empire ended. They come up with different dates. And let's look at 3 very quickly of the most popular dates for when these prophecy guys say that the Roman Empire ended. First, in my old church, I was taught that the Roman Empire ended as a world power in 476 AD. 476 AD. Why do they use 476? Well, they say that's when the Western Roman Empire fell. The part of the Roman Empire that had the city of Rome as its capital. That part of the Roman Empire did fall 476 AD. Second one, in this picture that we're using tonight, let me see if I can get a little close up, maybe you can see it. This picture says that the Roman Empire ended as a world power in 1453 AD. That's almost 1,000 years later than those who believe in 476 AD. That's a lot of time. Why is there such a big difference in these two things? Why do some guys use 1453 AD for the fall of the Roman Empire? Well, because that was when the Eastern Roman Empire fell. The Byzantine Roman Empire that had the city of Constantinople as its capital, it fell 1453 AD. Now here's the fun one. Here's the one I had fun with. Let's look at our third possible date for the fall of the Roman Empire. Duncan says that the Roman Empire actually ended in 1798 AD. 1798 AD. What happened in 1798? 2 things happened, according to him. First, that's when Napoleon Bonaparte had Pope Pius VI imprisoned. This Pope, Pope Pius VI, died while he was a prisoner of Napoleon. Duncan says this incident was the deadly wound spoken of in Revelation that ended the Roman Empire. Duncan says no to 476 AD. He says no to 1453 AD. Duncan says the correct date for the fall of the 4th Empire is 1798 AD. And this is significant. Now, remember that Bible scholars say that the 5th Empire in Daniel 2 has a political and military element as well as a religious element. And I was taught that the European Union was the political and military element, and that the Roman Catholic Church was the religious element. Little insertion here. Keeping up with Duncan's chronology, Duncan says that the religious element of this 5th Empire began rising again in 1929. That was when Mussolini signed the Lateran Treaty with the Catholic Church. All right, we're getting off into the weeds. Let's get back. Again, the Roman Catholic Church is the religious element of this 5th beast, according to Duncan. And let's get back to the political and military element that he's talking about. When Duncan talks about the year 1798 as the death date of the Roman Empire, remember Napoleon denuding the Catholic Church in 1798, he says in that same year, 1798, it's also the beginning of the rise of the end-time beast nation that is the political and military element of the Fifth Empire. Again, he says 1798 is pivotal regarding the power of this Fifth Empire of the Daniel 2 image, because he says that 1798 is the year that Napoleon imprisoned the Pope and the papacy lost its temporal power in Rome. But back to the political and military entity of this Fifth Empire, according to Duncan, that began to rise in 1798. What great nation was it that began its rise in 1798? Duncan says it's the United States. Isn't that fascinating? Now, I'm not a proponent of this theory, but I think I could have a lot of fun going into historical events during that time frame around 1798, and I think I could come up with some arguments and say, yeah, 1798 was the beginning of the U.S. becoming a great power. But I'm going to let Duncan do his own heavy lifting on this. I'm not going to carry any water for him. Anyway, I got to say that I've studied a lot of end-time scenarios, but I've never heard it put quite this way before. And apparently Duncan is not alone in this business of thinking that the United States is going to be the beast power in the end times that's going to persecute Christians. And this thought was not common 40 years ago when I first started studying this stuff. But today, there are a lot of people in Christianity who believe that the United States is going to be part of the end-time persecution of Christians in league with the Roman Catholic Church. Am I the only one who's fascinated by this? Again, let's be clear. I'm not promoting Duncan's scenario in any way, shape, or form. I'm not promoting any end-time scenario at this time. Nevertheless, I think it's good that we study this Daniel 2 empire thing for a very good reason. It's an important lesson that we can learn by looking at all these various interpretations of this Daniel 2 image. And we're going to talk about that lesson next time because we're out of time. We're going to get back into Daniel 2. And you might think that I've drilled down too much into too much detail. And so let's see if next time we can pull the camera back and look at it from more of a bird's eye view, because we've really drilled down and looked at a lot of detail. Obviously, we don't have time to get into it tonight. So please come back next Friday evening because we've got a lot of amazing stuff to look into. And we got to talk about the concept of faulty premises. I'm going to tip my hand, give you a little preview. I can't tell you how much that faulty premises have messed up people's understanding of end-time prophecies. Faulty premises have led literally millions of people down the wrong path of understanding end-time prophecies. And we've got to avoid the faulty premises. So that's next time on SOS. You don't want to miss that show a week from tonight. Now, before I turn this over to Nancy to tell us what's going on in the chat room, I want to ask you something. I want to ask you a question. How much did you pay to watch this show tonight? You know the answer to that. You
Post the dollar amount in the chat room.
Tell us the dollar amount in the chat room. You paid nothing for it. Everything we do at the Ronald L. Dart Evangelistic Association and at Dynamic Christian Ministries and Start Our Sabbath, they're absolutely free. Not only do we not charge for the things we produce, but we also just don't take money from the public. That's
that
right.
is so
we
true.
do not accept donations. We don't ask for them, and when we send them, you send them to us, we send them back. We don't want money. But you're not off the hook.
That's right. You owe us something.
You owe us, because we constantly ask you for something that's more valuable than money and more powerful than money, and that's your prayers.
Absolutely.
Whether you like the show or hate the show, and let me tell you, there are people who watch the show all the time who hate it, and they sit there and seethe. They are furious when they watch this show, and we love them. We want them to keep watching the show. Whether you like the show or hate the show, we still ask that you pray for SOS. Please pray that God will guide us in everything that we do. And we ask that if you find value in the show, hit the share button. Okay?
Yes, please.
And I'm trying desperately to bring on the share button. There it is, the share button picture. Okay, I'm not great at technology. So please, Share the show
Yeah.
if you think that it has any value. Share it.
And whether or not you think it has value, pray for it.
And pray for us, whatever you do,
That's
because
right.
prayer is powerful. We are a people who believe in the power of prayer. So please pray for this show. Pray for us. We pray for you all the time. So please pray for us.
And
Nancy,
we pray that we do a good job all
and
the
we
time.
try. We really do. We're sincere. Nancy, what do you got in the chat?
I did want to say something quickly that Trudy Cranford and her husband were suffering with shingles, and they're both doing better. So that's a praise report. I want to put that
Okay,
in.
so prayer of thanksgiving. Write this down so you won't forget. Prayer of thanksgiving for Trudy Cranford and her husband because they're improving on their shingles problem. We can't just go to God when we have a complaint or a problem or an illness. We got to go to Him when it comes time to show our thanks. So please, prayers of thanksgiving for Trudy Cranford and her husband for the improvement on their shingles. What else you got, sweetie?
All right, Bill says he gave up his apocaholic and prediction addiction ways a long time ago.
Apocaholic. I love that. I've never heard that term. An apocaholic is a person who is all hung up on apocalyptic events.
That's
at
right.
the,
I
thank
hadn't
you,
heard
Bill.
that one. I've heard of prediction addiction, but not that
Okay,
one.
good. Very
Okay,
good.
so
Thank you. See, this is why we love Bill.
Yeah.
Not only is
One of
he
the
a nice guy,
Yeah.
not only is he he comes across as a real, tough guy, but deep down inside,
He's
he's a
very
real
nice.
sweet guy, and we love him.
Very nice.
Not only because he's sweet, he's nice, he's got the Holy Spirit, but he's smart. Bill is smart. Sometimes too smart for his own good. Topic for another time. What else you got, sweetie?
Yes. Richard Maxwell early on said America gives authority to the beast, so he was talking about it.
Okay.
And, I thought he said that they taught that America was...
Who's they, the Seventh-day Adventists?
Richard Maxwell. I don't know who
I think
they-
Richard Maxwell's Richard, aren't you from the Church God's, from Seventh-day Adventists? Correct me
Anyway.
if I'm wrong, I don't want to bear false witness against you, Richard.
Okay, Daniel says that the head was Babylon.
Yes, the head of gold was Babylon.
Okay. Richard also says something is going to happen which will force a law to worship, and America will be behind it, so I've learned.
Okay.
Willow Laval says the world is divided in many regions, including what is known as NAFTA. It is something we have a president that wants to do. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't understand that.
Okay.
NAFTA. Let's see. Bill says Sunday law is how most SDAs view this, being the mark of the beast. I believe it's kind of hard to read some of these comments that were very timely when you were speaking,
Yeah.
but without your comment, it's hard
We're
to
not
go
sure
back.
what they're connecting it to. Sorry about that.
So Richard Maxwell said back in the 90s he did a study of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and you can private message him if you want that.
Who's that again?
Richard Maxwell.
Okay, thank you, Richard.
And Bill says that he assumes that that the USA as we know it will still be intact and around during the end times when they finally come. The way we are all going, I would not be surprised if the U.S. splits into 2 or even 3 nations in the coming 100 years.
Okay.
Willow Love Al said he's sharing. Thank you. Be like Willow Love Al, loves Al, and share too.
Thank you so much.
Bill says 200 million man army coming from the east is still a long ways. Even if China and India and the rest of the Far East were to continue combined armies, currently it would be less than 4 million currently. Plus you have to move equipment, feed and train 200 million.
Yeah, logistics is incredible for moving that many people. Yes.
Let's see.
We're not saying it's not going to be done. We're just saying that logistically it's going to be a real heavy lift.
Right. Linda Eason Hoover, replying to Richard's comment, says, Bill Lusenheit Sr., it's all straight from the Bible, no Ellen White commentaries given it any doctrines we hold. Let's see. Yes, most of these others really have, you need your comment to get them. But they were very timely at the time they were said. Melissa Chandler says, keep watching without speculation or worry, and quotes Matthew 25:13.
Okay, who says that?
Melissa Chandler.
Melissa Chandler brings up an excellent point. She uses the word worry. Don't worry about this stuff. And, and it's one thing to be obsessed by this or love this stuff and really want into it, not want to get into it. That's great, that's fine. The minute you start worrying about it, The minute that you're losing the value of God's word, the minute you start worrying, because remember, these prophecies are created. We talked about this on the show. They're created not for our calendar. They're created for our comfort, to show us that God's in charge. And we're going to talk about that a little bit next time as we continue this discussion. Don't worry. Melissa Chandler said that? Excellent comment. Thank you, Melissa. We can't worry about this stuff. But let's be honest. A lot of these preachers out there want you to worry about it. Not only that you need to figure out a way to save your hide, but they try to tell you you can save your hide by joining our organization, giving us a bunch of money, and you'll be in the right place, and then we're going to help you save your hide because we've got an inside scoop with God. That is just so wrong, and it has happened so many times in church history, and it's wrong. That's evil. And some of you out there know exactly what I'm talking about. And you can't argue with me because you know that's a fact. That it was taught that you had to be loyal to an organization, loyal to a certain person, or else you weren't going to get to go to the place of safety. Come on, we're past that.
We are indeed. So going to YouTube, Trudy Cranford said, when the New World Order goes full swing and the Roman Catholic / Islam take over as one religion, those against it will be killed or enslaved, as I've learned. Okay. So are you saying that the Roman Catholic and Islam will combine? That's interesting.
That sounds like it, yeah.
And I have to make a correction. I said Trudy and her husband. It's a friend, a buddy. Sorry, Trudy, married you off.
Okay, sorry, Trudy.
Back to Facebook, Lee Listman said, another possibility for us to consider, what nation, if it were destroyed in an hour, would cause all of the merchants on earth to weep, for no one is left to buy their goods? Would it? And he says Japan, ?
Good question.
So yes. Bill says he thought at once it was the USA, but now it's rapidly becoming China.
Good point. Because right now China produces more exports than the United States does. So if they're going to weep over anybody, I would think it'd be China, but we're getting off topic here. Okay. Go ahead.
Bill Bratt says Genesis 48:17-19 mentions a great nation and a multitude of nations. I still think this is the U.S. and
British
BC.
Commonwealth.
Oh, this is BC. I
BC.
kept thinking British Columbia.
No.
Or Mimians?
British Commonwealth.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
So let's see. Lee also says there's a possibility that the USA is Babylon the Great. China's a great seller of goods, but would weep if our consuming spigot ended in the 1 hour discussion.
Yeah.
Destruction. E pluribus unum, of many one, many peoples with one language, and nothing left of from the imagination in their heart. Okay, Mark Silas says, like Nancy said, teach love now. The rest will come as it comes and when it comes.
All right, we're back to your presentation now.
So actually, he's talking about yours. What we need to do in reaction to this is teach love.
Yeah.
Well, Laval says, God knows what we can handle if we are going through this time at the end of the age. And Amy says, she was talking about how it cost her an hour to watch the show. I hope it was an hour that you are happy you spent. And someone said, the time doesn't cost you anything. And she said, well, I'm out of work now, so yes, it does. But anyway, just good-natured.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But she says, I'm getting a lot of value out of it, so thank you, Amy.
She's not saying, boy, that's an hour of my life I wish I could get back. Are you saying that, Amy?
Or even worse, I'm dumber now after she's done.
Those are some brain cells that are dead that I'll never get back.
That's right. Bill says there's little doubt that Catholicism is based on the Babylonian mystery religion. Okay, and so Bill also says, indeed, Mark Silas, we need to be diligent on the things we have control over, which ultimately is a small space. The rest, always a small space. And Mary Young Perkins says the Pope and the Imam have been very close. Oh, that was back to my comment about Islam and Catholicism.
Go back to the previous comment. Things we have control over. What was that? The one before that.
Hang on.
It brought things we have control over. It brought to mind what every professional baseball player is taught in the minor leagues before he can even get to the professionals, and that is only worry about the things that you have control over. And they don't want the players looking at the scoreboard during the game hoping that this team they're rival with is losing their game, in another part of the country. The coaches don't like that. They don't want you looking at, and being concerned. They say, you have no control over that game that's being played in San Diego. Concentrate on the game that you're in right now. This is what you have control over. And what is it? Oh, what is that scripture? 11:27, Romans 11:27 about being found worthy. What is it? They post it all the time on this one. Or watch, the one about watching. And that scripture, someone can help me find it, about watching, has nothing to do with watching world events. It has everything to do with watching yourself. So be like the baseball players and the Major League Baseball. Be concerned about what you control. Don't be upset about what you can't control that's being done out there in the world.
Okay, Matthew 25:13. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour wherein the Son of Man comes.
Well, there's another one about being worthy or something. I used to know it off the top of my head because I griped about it all the time, that people were saying that scripture. If anybody finds it, let us know in the chat room.
Okay,
But
so
anyway,
it was Bill who made that comment about
Bill,
thing that Loose and Hide.
and he's a baseball player, so he knows all about only worrying about what you have control over, and don't worry about what you don't have control over. Okay, thank you, Bill. Good comment.
Rod Kuzman wants to know where he can give money and escape the coming destruction.
Yeah, right. Bill says send him a check. He'll take it.
Hey, help somebody out who needs it.
Yeah.
Amy's out of a job.
Yeah, Amy's out of a job. Send her a love offering. Yeah. Okay.
There you go.
All right, do we have anything else? Should we...
Okay, here we go. Luke 21:36. Watch therefore and pray always
Yes.
that you may be counted worthy to escape all these things that will come to pass and to stand before the Son of Man. So you're saying that this does not mean to watch world events.
No,
it means
Luke
to watch yourself.
21:36, right?
Yes.
Luke 21:36 has nothing to do with reading Time magazine and watching the news on the internet and being up to date. It has everything to do with watch yourself, not watching world events. But you got churches out there that quote that scripture and tell you to watch world events. And then as you see some earthquake in Argentina, you're going to know, oh, the end is coming. Send us some money so we can preach the gospel. We're running out of time. Don't fall for it. Watch yourself.
How can watching world events make you worthy? It might make you knowledgeable, but it can't make you worthy. Only the blood of Christ can make you worthy.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Anyway, okay. All right, so we should probably wrap this up. It's about not quite 20 after 9, and we already know what you're doing next week. Has Bill told us what he's doing next week?
No, Bill, tell us what you're doing next week.
I have no idea what I'm doing, so I better get started tomorrow.
You said you don't know, you have no idea what you're doing. Do you mean about next week's show or life in general? Okay.
Next week's show.
Next week's show. I thought that's what you meant.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure they all understood. Okay. Anything else we need to say?
Should we close with prayer?
Let's close with prayer.
Oh, there is something else that we forgot to mention. So we're talking about sharing and all that kind of stuff. You know, if you never want to miss out on an upcoming SOS and you want to know what's going on in RLDEA, you can subscribe to our YouTube channels. And I was on YouTube earlier and noticed that we had over 100 people. Let's see, 176, almost 200 people subscribed to the Dynamic Christian Ministries YouTube channel where we post SOS. So, super exciting.
So, subscribe to that and Ronald L. Dart Evangelistic Association.
Yeah, so you never miss a show or anything.
They're both free. They cost you nothing. Yeah, and you'll never miss a show.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right, let's close with prayer. Father in heaven, we thank you so much for your Bible. We thank you for the comfort that you provide for us in your word. And we thank you for the comfort that we receive after understanding your prophecies, that they have nothing to do with our calendar. They have to do with the comfort of knowing that you're in charge, you're going to take care of your people, you will provide all good things, all things turn out good for those who love God. So thank you for that information, Father. Help us not to be ensnared by false prophets and people setting dates and implying dates. Help us to put our eyes on your Son, Jesus Christ. Help us to emulate him. Help us to be like Jesus. Help us to love one another. Help us to love our enemies, everyone who's out there, because really we have no enemies. We thank you for the love that was here tonight on this show. We ask your blessing on those who are going to be traveling tomorrow to go to churches all around the world. Please give them safety. Please provide them with great church services, wherever it may be. Inspire the music, the fun, the fellowship, the food, the preaching, the hearing, everything. And now we commit our lives to you once again in the name of Jesus. We give you praise and thanks in his name. Amen.
Amen.
So, see you next Friday night. And in the meantime,
Have a good Sabbath.
All right. We ready to shut down?
I think so.
Let's see if I know how to do this. Slide to